we can. Okay, thank you very much. Good morning for those who are at AM here, and good afternoon and good evening for Lipika and Joseph. Thank you very much for being with us. So this is a panel on world literature we have called it from a multicultural perspective. And I had written a little uh, paragraph about world literature, but I want to mention something because today is June the 16th, and today is Bloom's Day. And
Great.
although we are not talking about Joyce, we are celebrating him too because Joyce wrote a multilingual book, Finnegan's Wake. And today, June the 16th, due to the circumstances, our panel was going to be two weeks before, and it couldn't be. So it's very beautiful that it is today. Because it was in June 16, 1904, that is narrated Bloom's Day and the wonders of Odysseus to one day in the life of Dublin characters, especially Leon Bloom. And today, also around the world, they're celebrating Bloom's Day and also Molly Bloom's Day because it's Joyce who
Great.
is the male character who has been celebrated, but Molly is a great character. And this Ulysses by James Joyce begins at 8 a.m. in the morning, as we are doing today. So I think we are celebrating also Joyce. So we have with us Lipika Das. I'm going to present them because then you can just do your presentations. Lipika is from the Indian Institute of Technology at Bhubaneswar, Odisha in India. And she will present the idea of world literature outside the Anglosphere. And she is also directing the Center of World Literature in Odisha. She will talk about it when she's doing the presentation. And Yeo Ghana, who's not going to be with us because of health issues. He was going to he's from the Université Félix Houphouët-Boigny at Abidjan, and he was going to present the work of Amadou Hampâté Bâ, Le Petit Baudiel. And Amadou was a historian, a writer, and an ethnologue who dedicated his academic work to recollect oral African treasures, legends, myths, oral tradition. He made part of UNESCO. He was born in Mali, but he died at Abidjan. And Yeo had done his PhD on this author and the translations of his work. Unfortunately, he's not going to be with us, but he will be with us in the future. And so I leave the public this curiosity. And Joseph Dishi, who is a Canadian professor at the Canadian University in Dubai, and he will be giving a general introduction to Arabic literature. He had been with us in another panel about Maurice Blanchon, and he has experience in publishing. He's a publisher himself. He has a publishing house, and he will talk a little bit about his career when he takes the word. So I really want to thank you, Lipika and Joseph, and I want to thank those who can be here in Colombia. It's early, but it's normal time. But everybody is busy. So those who can accompany us through YouTube, thank you very much, and you are welcome to write your comments or questions at the end of the presentation, so we can have have a nice conversation. So, Lipika, can you start?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much, ma'am, for this great opportunity. Let me share my screen first. Yes, I have shared my screen. I
Everything
hope
is
all
fine.
you can access. Great. I'm very excited to be a part of this prestigious event and this panel on contemporary, I think this panel has contemporary relevance across the world as we have initiated an approach to look at the world from a multilingual and multicultural perspective. And my special thanks to Professor Martha and of course to the panel for organizing this event and initiating such an interesting discussion on the idea of world literature. Well, let me scroll a bit. I raise a question. I raise a simple question, as you can see on my screen. Can world literature exist without English? The question appears simple, but it involves complexities. Let's see how. The very expression of world literature involves a contradiction, and this constitutes the central idea of my work. How world literature in English is world literature. I would like to interrogate this contradiction in the context of Odisha. And I do hope I significantly contribute to this panel, and I welcome your suggestions and observations on this work. Before I proceed, I'd like to briefly introduce the idea of Odisha to my foreign panelists and audience. Odisha is located in eastern India with over 41 million inhabitants. The language of Odisha is Odia, which is one of the classical languages of the country. Odisha is famous for its historical junctures and spectacular scenery. Odisha has a wide range of tourist attractions from coastlines to pilgrimage sites for visitors worldwide. The Puri Sea Beach Festival, the classical dance form known as Odissi dance, and the world famous Rath Yatra of Lord Jagannath or the Car Festival attract tons of crowds every year to this state. And against this multi-layered, rich cultural site of Odisha, I set out to interrogate, can world literature exist without English in a state that is primarily based on the linguistic identity of Odia language? I must mention this is a contemporary concern and no study on this has been done yet. I would also like to state that I have undertaken a state government project on this research under the aegis of Odisha University Research Innovation Incentivization Plan. My research on world literature is funded by the state government. World literature is an ideologically driven project. Let me scroll a bit. Yes. If we ask another basic question, how a text becomes a part of world literature, the answer is it is never one short affair. Instead, it involves many stages. At first, a local literature moves beyond its local boundary, but that's not enough. A local literature is asked to go beyond its linguistic boundary and then present itself in a global language to be a part of world literature, as reflected by the contemporary scholar of world literature, David Demrosh, who is the winner of the prestigious Balsan Prize for 2023 for his creative approach to world literature, says, I quote, a work enters into world literature by a double process. First, by being read as literature. Second, by circulating out into a broader world beyond its linguistic and cultural point of origin. So a text is not world literature as it is. A text becomes a world literature text when presented in English only. So there is a system that presents local literatures in English And this system takes charge of presenting literatures from across multiple cultural and linguistic backgrounds in just one language, English. Now let me scroll a bit. This reduces the world into a small world, into a narrow world. And this small world is for a small audience, English speaking audience only. So the enterprise of world literature works on an assumption, and that is, as you can see on my screen, it can exist in English only, either in translation or written in English. And this remains unquestioned. This is the research gap that I address in my work, that world literature survives only in English. I investigate this in the context of Odisha. In this research, my purpose is neither to offer any value judgment nor to compare the literary excellence of the texts in English translation with that of Odia. Instead, my purpose is to study the idea of world literature and how it is received in a non-English context. I would also like to explore the possibilities of creating world literature, not just in English, but in multiple languages. And I feel this question that I have raised, can world literature exist without English, assumes relevance not only in a specific context of Odisha, but in all non-Western, non-English contexts across the globe. I hope all of you can hear me well. I'm audible. Great. In this regard, I will discuss the reception of world literature in Odisha with specific reference to two publishing initiatives, Manmohan Pustakalaya and Granthamandir. These initiatives play a key role in instituting the idea of world literature in Odisha. First, I will talk about Manmohan Pustakalaya. In the 1960s, in the Indian cultural scene, particularly in Odisha, of a recently decolonized nation, something interesting appears in a city named Cuttack. Yes, the name of the city is Cuttack. Before I talk about the cultural event that I just mentioned, let me quickly, briefly introduce the city named Cuttack to our foreign audience. I have some pictures on my screen, like the city and how it looks like and the rich cultural heritage. Starting from 11th century, Cuttack was the imperial capital of the Afghans, Marathas, Mughals, and then British. It was considered the commercial capital of Odisha. It is a small town but cosmopolitan in nature with the influences like Anglo-Indian, Chinese, Marwadis, Telugu, Muslims, Jains, Christians, and many more. The city is the print capital of Odisha as print industry has its roots here starting from 1837 when the missionaries brought printing machines to print Bibles in local language. And from 1866 onwards, it became the epicenter of print culture of Odisha as newspapers, books, magazines, textbooks, periodicals, all were printed from here. The city is also famous for its intricate silver jewelry designs known as silver filigree work across the world. It is famously known as the Silver City of Odisha. The city is also famous for the festival called Bali Jatra, which means a voyage to Bali. You can see I have some pictures of the festival on my screen, and I'll tell you in a while how this relates to the idea that we are presenting here. This festival lasts for 7 days and it is considered the largest open trade fair of not just India but Asia. It marks an important day in the history of Odisha when the ancient mariners sailed to the distant lands of Bali, Java, Indonesia, Sri Lanka for trade and cultural expansion. So the cosmopolitan links are evident in the city. One can note its active contact with the world outside. Hence, it is not surprising that this province is simply not just trying to reach out to the world, but now on its own terms trying to bring the world home in its own language. My intention is to introduce the city briefly to our foreign audience and understand the reasons of emergence of publishing initiatives in this city particularly. Because all the major publishers who attempted to create world literature for the native readers were located in this city, as it was the contemporary commercial capital of Odisha. So this place was conducive for innovation and experiments of for like those who initiated this publishing projects. Well, in the 1960s, a striking thing happens in the city which is considered culturally significant, and that is the publication of Nobel Prize winning books in Odia translation. However, there were massive translations earlier, but no one conceived of such an ambitious project to publish Nobel Prize winning books in a series under the heading World Literature, Vishwa Sahitya in Odia. In fact, the title which was mentioned in many of the books was Vishwa Sahitya Srestha, meaning the best in the world. This ideation is important as world literature is received as an entity where prized books form a part of the idea of world literature but not the whole. Thus, subtly, in a very indirect way, creating possibilities to explore the other parts of this entity in future. We will talk about it in a while in case of the second publisher. Let me scroll a bit. Yes. So the first publishing project was undertaken under the banner of Manmohan Pustakaraya. I have the logo of the publishing industry on my screen, as you can see. This project involved the translation of 40 Nobel Prize winning books by famous writers of world stature like Bertrand Russell, Drummond Roland, Grazia Deledda, T.S. Eliot, Pearl S. Berg, Francois Mauriac, Raymond, and many others. However, only one edition of each was published by the press, and there was no reprint by the publisher. Now, these books are available only in libraries and personal collections. Now, I will bring into focus three interesting features of this publication. In the first place, this was the first initiative in the history of the reception of world literature in Odisha, which was published under the title Vishwa Sahitya, meaning world literature. However, earlier there were discussions on the idea of world literature in magazines, in speeches, in literary conversations, and the like, but no concrete theoretical account ever appeared under the formal title of world literature or Vishwa Sahitya. So these publications initiate the idea of world literature as a nomenclature in the literary scene of Odisha in the 20th century. Secondly, the project involved a highly selected category, that is, Nobel Prize winning books only. So, this reveals an important cultural change in the reception of the West in the East. A newly decolonized nation now looks at the world from a more confident perspective. Once nationalism achieves its goal by bringing into being an independent nation, it does not simply engage with the literature of another nation, rather, promptly, confidently cast its net wider, and a new category emerges in the form of Nobel Prize winning books in Odia translation. Hence, there was a confident attempt to define world literature as the best literature in the world. And how do we consider something as the best? Only when it receives a great prize of international stature. So the idea of world comes from the best in the world, like the Nobel Prize. So the first formal definition of world literature in Odisha was prized literature. In the third place, These translated texts carried forwards contributed by the concerned Nobel laureates for the publication of their books in Odia translation. This is a form of recognition given by the authors of world stature to the Odia translators who translated their text into a non-world language, as many of these translations were the first translations into any Asian language. This information reveals interesting connections between a specific locale and the larger world. So this is a very significant way of how the local negotiates with the idea of global. Sorry. Bear with me, I have a bad throat. This is the first attempt to create space for world literature in Odia through some selected texts only, which are already considered the best in the world. However, this project was a commercial failure. Yes. What exists in libraries is the first print of the book, and there was never second editions or reprints. However, commercial success is not the only qualification that grants a text its value. It can simply be its existence too. A work of literature can be culturally significant only because it exists. In this context, I would like to refer to Krish Keith. Yes, you can see the book that I refer to. Krish Keith, in his book titled The Gospel as Manuscript, An Early History of the Jesus Tradition as Material Artifact, reflects on how book is received as a material artifact. And he describes, yes, I quote, manuscripts as part of the decorated material culture of a group and thereby also sees them as symbols of group identity. So a work of literature can be culturally significant only because it exists. And such an existence may be a strong foundation to hold pillars of a new cultural era, extremely significant not only for that locality where it appears, but for the world. Yes, because this is an initiative to introduce world literature in mother tongue. So it is important to any non-English context. This project assumes significance in the cultural context of Odisha only because it successfully materialized. Its existence becomes important than its survival, as this initiative nurtured the idea of world literature and prepared a well-built cultural context for a more confident reception of the world in just next 5 years. Let me scroll a bit. Yes. Thus, in 1969, in the contemporary cultural scene of Odisha, appears the complete series of Biswa Sahitya Granthamala, published by Granthamande, a publication house founded by Sridhar Mahapatra. I have the picture of the publishing house and the logo on my screen. Yes. This is the second and a more confident attempt to create world literature in Odia language. An important connection to note, this project coincides with another important event in the contemporary time. Let me scroll a bit. Yes. In 1966, United Nations Human Rights, Article 27 of the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights declares the freedom to use our own language. Most possibly, that was the time Odia world literature was conceived and started thriving. And in just next 3 years, world literature appeared in Odia language. This project was conceived and published as Biswa Sahitya, meaning a series in world literature text, and this deserves our attention. Let me scroll a bit. Now, we see a more confident attempt on the part of the second publisher to use the idea of world literature as the title of the series as Biswa Sahitya Granthamala, meaning the world literature series. And you can see the title in bold letters on the top of the cover page in each of the book series. I have some pictures for reference. Here is the logo at the bottom, and this is Vishwa Sahitya Granthamala, meaning World Literature Series. The project published a series of world literary texts in abridged versions and made an inclusion of literary genres like novels, fantasy tales, adventure stories, morality tales, drama, scientific fiction, fairy tales, plays, and many, many more, all meant for young readers. This series contained around 200 books with about 1,000 stories drawn from more than 60 authors from across the world. And it has printed 15, 16 editions till date and sold 100 sets per year. The cover page of the series carried the title of the story, the name of the project, which is Vishwa Sahitya Granthamala, meaning World Literature Series, at the top center of the book, and the name of the publisher, Granthamandir, at the bottom. Many books carried an illustration of the story, like you can see here. And some books carried only the picture of world authors, even without their names. This is not surprising, as an English knowing readership, it's supposed to be familiar with a world author's fame. And there is one more reason as well, as they are presented chiefly as storytellers, hence no other information was supplied. See, these are the pictures I have taken from the shop, and you can see the number of books arranged here. This also reveals another interesting perspective on the reception of world authors. They become more inviting, more approachable, and more interesting when dressed as storytellers in palm-sized thin books. More like, little more than a pocketbook, but palm-sized thin books. This new format is interesting as it differs from the scholarly discipline of world literature, which is always received in academic context. These colorful and fresh storytellers are quite alluring for young readers, where the focus is not on the style and form, but on the story only. The series appropriates authors like Shakespeare, Homer, Mark Twain, Jules Verne, Anton Chekhov, George Eliot, Jane Austen, Charles Dickens, Emily Bronte, Guy de Maupassant, Leo Tolstoy, Cervantes, and many more. This project also includes some Indian writers of world fame like Kalidas, Fakir Mohan Senapati, Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, and also the major Indian epics like the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. To conceive it as Vishwa Sahitya cannot be random. Instead, this decision is conscious, because I feel this decision of a translator cannot escape the politics of language. The choice of language is central to a translator, and this choice cannot be just literal. Now, in 21st century in Odisha, world literature without English survives successfully in a local language, in a non-world language. A local publisher with a team of 30 translators introduces world literature outside the space within which the world lives as world literature, as put by Dan Roche. This bold attempt is a milestone in the history of Odia literature. So the use of this terminology in the contemporary literary scene in Odisha cannot be just by chance. Instead, it is deliberate, and I strongly believe that it has much wider connections beyond the literary boundaries. Because literature is always marked by two things: the presence and the absence. Yes, literature is always marked by the presence of dominant ideologies and the absence of repressed practices. And literature cannot escape the contemporary politics. So, the existing state of world literature, which is always presented in English, is marked by two things. First, the presence of a dominant language, and second, the absence of many repressed native languages. So I think the idea of suppression, control, and hegemony have now taken on a new turn, and here is a fresh way to deal with it, not by engaging with it, instead, simply by questioning, interrogating, and then overcoming it. What can be a strong and concrete response than this? As a result, we see the very idea of Biswa Sahitya is also marked by the dominance of a native language and the absence of the imperial hegemon, which would pose a threat to the remote non-world languages. So here is a bold attempt to respond to the language hegemony, not by talking about it, but simply by excluding it from the contemporary practice of world literature in a non-English context. Hence, I would like to conclude that these initiatives in Odisha form an important cultural existence not only for the locale where it appeared, but for the world. It has global significance as these initiatives, realized as Biswa Sahitya, question the present practices of monolingual world literature, thus creating possibilities for a multilingual alternative. These initiatives form part of a larger initiative to strengthen and promote the vernacular. I may now refer to a recent state government initiative on preserving and promoting local culture and heritage. If you visit our place, if ever you visit Odisha, you will find all the walls across the street are painted beautifully and each tells a story. For example, I have collected some pictures which I mean on my way to my college, as you can see on my screen. Interestingly, these are referred to the speaking walls on social media, are like, and you can find more videos on the same on YouTube. Apparently, we may feel that this is an attempt to beautify a city, but it has a larger agenda as they try to preserve the local culture and promote our language. As you can see here, this is the wall across the street, and here it is written Odia Bhasa Sahitya, meaning Odia language and literature. Same here. Here there is a reference to a very famous text of Rabindranath Tagore, Gitanjali, and followed by like other famous books. So all these initiatives, as we see, whether publishing or wall painting, see here I have one more picture. This is again the wall across the street, and these are the Odia alphabets, like, to promote. This is a very interesting and very subtle, significant way to promote, preserve language and promote it. And there are other beautiful pictures as well on cultural heritage, like the dance form, the art form, and many more. Yes. So these initiatives, as we see, whether publishing or wall painting, these not just attempt to preserve the rural flavors and traditional essence of the province, but also prove that we can have our own ideas of the world, which can be clearly expressed not in English, but in our mother tongue. This attempt is very bold. Odia language is capable of great things. It can be a medium not just to passively receive others' literature, but also to actively express a very scholarly idea like world literature. And these initiatives are significant as these recognize possibilities of the existence of world literature in any language. And our Center for the Study of World Literature at IIIT Bhubaneswar, which is International Institute of Information and Technology, contributes to and strengthens this initiative in Odisha. To conclude, I warmly invite you all to join our center and contribute to the local idea of world from your non-English context. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lipika. Very, very, very interesting. So, well, we'll talk afterwards. So, Joseph, now we were going to move from India to to the Arab histories and oral literature, well, we are expecting a lot, Joseph. You have the platform. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the initiative of this panel, which is very interesting. And now, thanks to Lipika, I know what to join next. Since she even so I'll send her. So Arabic literature. I'll try and make something that makes sense within 20 minutes, which is not simple. First of all, it's an old, less old, of course, than Indian or Chinese literature, but it goes back backwards, say 16, 15, 16, 17 centuries ago. Islam was founded 15 centuries ago, but there was poetry for centuries in the Arabian Peninsula before. And this literature starts with poetry. It starts with poetry because it's an oral tradition, and poetry allows verses and oral traditions to be remembered. In those days, people would be able to listen to, say, 15 verses poem and remember them immediately, which we have completely lost. We also have real evidence that, say, in the 8th or 9th or 10th century, people would gather for the reading of a book. They'd gather and they would listen to the reading of a book, of the pages of a book, even sometimes reading of pages of a dictionary. Then they would go home and write down everything they've heard, which of course we can't imagine. Arab literature is something which has a historical context. The historical context is, prehistorical context is that people have been moving from Arabia towards the north, that is Iraq, Syria, the Fertile Crescent, and Egypt, and all through thousands of years. And with Islam, this has continued moving. It was not only people traveling, it was also people bringing a culture, an ideology, holy text, and a social structure for society. Okay, because if you don't have judges, something wrong happens to you, you only have revenge. But if you have judges, you go to the judge, and then, of course, it makes a difference. When the first caliphs, when the caliphs, after the death of the Prophet, moved, first of all, to Damascus, and then after 750, they shifted from Damascus to Baghdad. But when they moved, in fact, they moved to places where there had been a tradition of literature, of writing down, of accountancy, of scribal work in general, which included accountancy, administration, and literature, and knowledge, and medicine, and and knowledge of the stars, for instance, for centuries. When we come to literature, I mentioned, first of all, the pre-Islamic and beginning of Islam age, and then there was I'll give you a few examples. The poetry of the desert is a great poetry. It's one of the greatest poetry of all times, that and of all places. And I'll give you a few examples. The first example shows something that could be accepted, say, by the Chinese poets and Chinese rhetoric. That is, poetry comes from the world. And in those days, they imagined the man of the desert. It's also in the Quran. They imagined that there were jinns. Jinns are people who are not people really, but in the Quran, they go to paradise or to hell, depending on their actions. And the poets would say that poetry came from jinns. So Imru al-Qais, who is one of the greatest poets of ancient Arabia, would say, let me just let you hear the music of Arabic just once. تخيرني الجن أشعارها فما شئت من شعرهن انتقيت. Jinns allow me to choose, can pick up. So this means that inspiration comes from nature, inspiration comes from outside, but me, I, that is the poet, I choose. So the choice is human. Because the jinns are also people who could enter the mind of someone and make that person mad. But in fact, no, the poet always keeps control. So this is a poetry related to nature. Of course, there are lots of verses, but in ancient Arabic poetry, there is, which is very interesting, there's more wine poetry in Arabic than there is in French, which is surprising because the French have wine, and the Arabs have, and for the Arabs, for the Muslims, wine is or alcohol is forbidden, but they have wine poetry. For instance, in the 7th century, Al-Asha would say, many a cup I drank for pleasure, then quaffed another one, to cure the illness that came from the first. So this would come from poetry. Later on, in the 11th century, Abu al-Ala al-Ma'ari, one of the greatest Arabic poets, would say, from cup of wine you flee, and lo, it follows thee, as if of death you were the true and deep lover. So the lover of death. In poetry, in the Arab ancient poetry, there's a lot of poetry about love. And it is love here is love and desire. It's forbidden love. It's not love that should come in a family and you marry. It's another ideology of love. And love, as if love were what cures man from death, the same as wine, because the moments of love are eternal. So eternity in moments of love can cure man from death. And you would have a blind poet like Bashar ben Burd in the 9th century saying, O ye people, my ear loves someone living near. Ears fall in love at times, truly before the eyes. Okay, so I've tried to, I looked a lot on the original Arabic. And then this is love, but love is dangerous. He would say, the same poet, you cried for love, with love in infancy. Woe to you, woe, when love is fully grown. So when love grows, so woe to you. This means that poetry, love is something that is, it's not explicitly, but it's implicitly related to death. In the Arabic literature, we move from the Arab Peninsula to the areas of Syria, Iraq, and Egypt, and later Egypt. And in fact, they move to another culture, but they keep the founding myth of Arabic poetry and Arabic literature as something that is founding for their culture. They did huge compilation of ancient Arabic poetry because of this allowed to contextualize the text of the Quran. You can have words in the Quran that appear once or twice, and the Quran does not give a clear context. So they did that. They also built huge dictionaries. The first extensive, complete dictionary of all times in human history was the dictionary of Al-Khalil bin Ahmad al-Farahidi. That's in the 8th century. I have shown that in a paper. And the fact is, they needed poetry. Now, coming back to love related to death, just for being thematic for a few minutes, and then I'll move on to more modern texts, had death Ibn Zaydun. Ibn Zaydun was a poet from the Andalus, so he was from Spain, and Arabic or Arabian Spain. And he was in love with a woman who is also a poet called Wallada. So Ibn Zaydun and Wallada are famous lovers of that time. And of course they parted. And after they parted, he writes about the times when they were together, and he says, had death that day taken us together, yet it would still have been the most generous gift. And I thank God today for the moments we shared. You see the eternity of moments, for the moments we shared. Your heart enjoyed peace, and both of us remain lovers. So they have been lovers for a while, but they remain lovers for eternity. And this is a victory over death, or a direct relation between love, desire, and impossible love and death, which is, of course, something that comes along. And I have thousands of examples, but now I just want to say a few things. I'm moving from, and poetry is still alive today. There are clubs of poetry. There's even a poetry event this evening in Sharjah. And you go there and you have poets reciting their poets, so their poems. And of course, poetry does not appear, it's not always with poetic words that you get real poetry. But then poetry appears like gems in the middle of the sand of all that is said. And this still goes on today, and they still like, so I have a memory for a certain number of Arabic verses, and they ask me to tell them. They know them, but they just want to hear them again. So that's part of poetry is essential. And now, in the classical golden age, the classical golden age is the time when they were in Iraq. In Iraq, there were two centers, Basra, which is in the south, and Baghdad, of course, the capital. And they had lots of poems, of poets and writers. Let me just mention one, Al-Jahiz. Al-Jahiz died in 868, so in the 8th, and he was a great writer. He writes magnificent things. He wrote a big book called the Book of Animals, Kitab al-Hayawan. He wrote also the book of Misers, Kitab al-Bukhala, which is really about logics and paralogism, and he has very funny things, of course. And also he wrote about an ancient idea of rhetoric. Rhetoric, not together in a beautiful way, but rhetoric being explaining the world. The word was the Arabic word is bayan, making the world clear, discovering things in the world, which you get through metaphor, but in fact through comparison. You take two things, okay, for say night and day, life and death, and you put them together and you build something that compares. And comparison builds things and relations that were not existing before. This is essential in the view of people like Al-Jahiz, but Ibn Qutayba and many, many others. It explained the Quran. The Quran for the Muslims is the word of God, okay? For non-Muslims, it is not. For Muslims, it's the word of God. And the word of God is beautiful. And the Quran includes very beautiful texts. But in these magnificent texts, you would have, for instance, expressions like the hand of God. So does God has a hand, like you and me, or does it mean something else? And for some people, this is literalist against interpretative reading of the text. So there were two trends. And bayan is showing the world as it is, and you can explain the world. When you want to explain the world, then you immediately compare things or bring things that are not together, you bring them together. Like in poetry, you bring together wine and the pleasure of wine and also death. You bring together love and the pleasure of love and the eternity of moments of love and death, which is something we cannot escape, unfortunately. There were great poets, Al-Mutanabbi, Abu Nuwas, Al-Ma'arri. There were great critics also, great critics. The critics are great. So you have Qudama bin Ja'far. They also mentioned Al-Jurjani. Critics bring together texts and analyze them. And in fact, it's based on the analysis of the Quran. In the Quran, there is a verse that says, "O you men, if you can write something of the same level and beauty of the Quran, do it, but you will not. A man cannot. It's impossible to imitate the Quran." Again, it is not true, but the verse says that. So the rhetoric of analyzing the Quran is a rhetoric that is interested in comparison. Comparison is the main figure of rhetoric. We would say, anybody today would say metaphor, but in fact, metaphor is based on a comparison. Comparison is bringing two things together. So, we had there was a great literature in Spain. One great book would be The Ring of the Dove. The Ring of the Dove, translated by Arbery. So The Ring of the Dove is a great book about love and the relations of love, which doesn't just mean love as a desire that should be condemned by society, etc. But it's something which can be much deeper and, of course, related to the love of God in the end. So that's Ibn Hazm, the ring of the dove. Just to give one example, we've seen Ibn Zaydun, and then how long do I still have?
Joseph, I think you can go still 10 minutes. It's okay?
Okay. No, 10 is I will try and be and less and speak less. So then you have after the fall of the caliphate, that's in the middle of the 13th century, with the Mongol invasions, something happened, that there was no central place from where people would pay poets, for instance, or would pay researchers and would pay people for doing research. And so the political collapse had an effect on writing. And the main effect, they traditionally in schools, they talk about stagnation. It's not true. It is absolutely not true. It is because there was no central place from where things were transmitted. So the stagnation was not that of production or writing. It was the stagnation of transmitting. And institutions, during those times, there were storytellers and reciters. We all know about A Thousand and One Night, which was translated by Burton into English, as we all know, but there are many other translations. There's a translation of Galland. There are many translations in French and in English. Some of them are censure because the Thousand and One Nights is a popular writing. It's partly in spoken Arabic, partly in written Arabic, and it is completely free, including describing sex or explicit relations. And you have some verses in the 1000th Night that you should not show to children. Although today children have changed, but that's it. So there were also storytellers, and there are lots of this. Azir, for instance, there is Baybars. There are a number of stories, and they are very big. For instance, Baybars would be 30 volumes. Baybars is a hero who fought against the Crusaders. Okay, so there's a whole story about him, and these works are stopped being works that are supported by a central power, such as the Caliph or others, but becomes something that comes from the people, and because storytellers will go from town to town. And there was still storytellers in Damascus in the beginning of the century. I don't know if they're still there, but there's one place behind the mosque of the Umayyads where you could go and hear a storyteller. And that's the period of the Ottoman Empire after the fall of the Abbasids. And then in the tradition of Arabic literature, as it is taught in school, they talk about the Arab Renaissance. The Arab Renaissance starts the beginning of the 19th century. In fact, well, schools will not teach you that, but it starts with the arrival of Napoleon in Egypt. Napoleon dreamt of, if he thought he'd be the emperor of the East if he had not been the emperor of France. So that was a dream of Napoleon. And Napoleon brought scientists. They studied everything in Egypt, and they wrote very interesting books describing it. And the Egyptians looked at the Europeans and they said, we should do the same. We should develop science. And they did. Napoleon and the French brought something which was appearing in France at the same time in Paris as in Cairo, the press. So they had the press with today's news. They just printed them and they put them on walls. Appeared when Napoleon left, the Egyptians built their own press. So the press was an important moment of developing culture, and this started with the 19th century. Now, in the 19th century, they had writers who were critics, such as Boutros al-Bustani, Rifa' al-Tahtawi, Ahmed Faris al-Shidyaq, okay, who rewrote the history of Arabic literature. And they made Arabic literature what it is now. So today, what people study in school is not ancient Arabic literature, it's the rewriting of this Arabic literature in the 19th century. That would have pleased George Orwell. So it's a rewritten, but it's full of very interesting things. Rifa' al-Tahtawi, just to mention him, Rifa' al-Tahtawi had accompanied a group of people sent to France by the king of Egypt to study. And they studied their sciences so they could bring back science and build science academies in Egypt. And Rifa' al-Tahtawi accompanied them, and he was their imam, sort of a priest accompanying those young people. And but he wrote magnificent books, and he also defended women in society. He's one of the first feminist authors, and he defended women so strongly that he ended his life in exile in some forsaken place because of his strong defense of women, and he wanted women to study in schools. You know that today in Afghanistan, they've kicked little girls out of schools. So that's a problem. But Rifa' al-Tahtawi was defending them. And you also have Ahmed Faris al-Shidyaq, Rifa' al-Tahtawi, Egyptian, Ahmed Faris al-Shidyaq, who was Lebanese, who wrote magnificent books on the vocabulary, the history, retelling the history of what we call Arab literature. And he has a book which called Leg Over Leg. It's just crossing one leg, leg over leg. And it was novelistic and linguistic at the same time, and translated into English by Humphrey Davis. And also today we have, and I'll end up with this very, very quickly, just mentioning a few words. We had the greatest known novelist is Naguib Mahfouz, who was a Nobel Prize award. And so he has a trilogy, Palace Walk, Palace of Desire, Sugar Street. Some of his books have had more than one translations. And so he writes about Cairo. He writes, the real main character of his writing is the city of Cairo, but then there are people. And of course, you have young people thinking of the Abbasid period, and some very free, explicit verse from that time, and saying, why are we not living in the same days? Which may not be absolutely true. Then you have Palestinian literature with Ghassan Kanafani. Ghassan Kanafani wrote a story. In fact, it's a book of short stories called Man in the Sun, translated by Hilary Kilpatrick. She did a magnificent translation. And so it's about people trying to run away. In fact, they run away in a tanker which has been emptied, and the tanker stays in the sun and they die. So the story is sad. And you also have, that goes back to the 1960s. We also have closer from us, that's beginning of this century, Cities of Salt by Abdurrahman Munif. Cities of Salt is a very interesting group of novels about the city, the way people lived. A man like Amitav Ghosh, who's a great Indian writer, English-speaking Indian writer, describes Cities of Salt as a work of magnificent, immense significance. And then you also have, to mention feminist literature, you have Nawal al-Sa'dawi. Nawal al-Sa'dawi lived in the end of the 19th and beginning of the 18th century, and she had a book called Memoirs from the Women's Prison. Memoirs from the Women's Prison, and Sa'dawi, and translated by Marilyn Booth. And it's a very interesting book. Nawal al-Sa'dawi was a feminist woman. Of course, she was the wife of a very important character. She did something, an event. She had her veil, and she went to the center of Cairo, the Ramses place, which is really completely central, where you have lots of people all around. She went up on a chair or a table, and she tore off her veil in front of everybody, which, of course, she could only do because she was the wife of someone important, and no police would attack her. Okay, so, and then I'll end up with this, although my references are a little bit old, but okay. But if you needed a survival kit, this would be part of it. A season of migration to the north. Season of migration to the north by Tayyib Saleh, S-A-L-I-H, translated into English, and it's a very interesting story about a young man who lives in Sudan, and Tayyib Saleh is Sudanese, and the young man is sent to Cairo, and he is received by a family, and he lives there. And it's extraordinary because it's moving from one world to another, and it describes the world. And to end within 30 seconds, Arab literature today is a literature that talks about what people suffer from. Okay, if your feet are aching, you can do whatever you want. Your feet go on aching, and when you speak, the suffering from your feet goes in front of you, and you have it in also in Rashid al-Daif, Rashid al-Daif's novel about what's it called? Rashid Dice, Who's Afraid of Meryl Streep? Who's Afraid of Meryl Streep is really a feminist novel which attacks, it's a man writing, attacks what's in the mind of men. So, because he believes that the society in the Arab world will move when it moves on the family and sexual side, and not only through revolution. Thank you for your attention. I hope I've not been too long.
Thank you very much, Joseph. We will have some questions about the names, especially, but
Yes.
I will ask you some because you mentioned many names and we missed them. But okay, maybe you can show us or give us the reference of an article where those names are written. Or, but I have some particular question I will ask you afterwards. Yes.
I can do one thing. One thing I can do is make a list of the names and the authors I've mentioned, and just a list, and send that to you, to the participants.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'll do that. So
okay,
so it's just a list, but I can do that easily.
Very good. Thank you very much. So it's my turn now. So I'm going to share my screen, and I try to be very brief so we can have a conversation. Let me see if I can. Yes, here. Okay. So if I think, yeah, my screen is showing. So my part of this contribution is Latin America in the landscape of world literature. I am at the School of Languages at Universidad de Antioquia, and I am a member of the research group on translation studies at this university. So I hear you see, you can see a map. Let me see if I can move it. Well, so I am going to be very short. Latin American Boom was a movement, a literary movement that went on from 1962 to 1972, although it had a lot of impact in the following writing of many writers in South America, in Latin America, and in the world. No, so I'm going to just mention some characteristics that made this boom possible. So one is the internationalization. These authors lived in exile, usually. I'm going to mention the authors in a moment. They were quickly translated into English, French, and Italian, especially. And so we can see the role played by translation in all the literatures we have talked about today. Their specific realities are seen as a part of a universal human experience. I'm glad that we can say, as we are talking about Bloomsday, they were very much influenced by Joyce, by Thomas Mann, by Kafka, Proust, and Faulkner, and many other authors, but I'm mentioning this especially. So the other characteristic is that the writers want the reader to be an active participant. This is more modern than the presentation Joseph did and Lipika. So they are innovating, no? They innovate the technique, the writing technique, and the language. Authors, for example, give instructions on the various ways the books could be read. They use fragmented, non-chronological structures. They juxtapose simultaneous dialogue. Sometimes stories are juxtaposed. There is a power of humorous verbal games and there is disruption of normal syntax. I'll try to give you some examples, although I cannot give you examples of every one of these elements. Magic realism, I think, is the great word term for this literary boom. And so what Peter Bertzel, who wrote an article about the boom, he said the magic realist writer is attempting to capture the mysterious and often incredible quality of Latin American reality. The readers are able to recognize in the magic words described their own realities. And the creation of imaginary utopic worlds in which reality, hyper-reality, and legend are not differentiated. Reality and not reality are put in the same level, and reality is ironically distorted, no? Like sometimes the use of sacred books distorted. Another element that characterized the literature of this time was social criticism. It was the time of revolutions. I'm not going to talk to be very long about this, but it was the time of Cuban Revolution. So situations of violence and corruption were treated openly. Political and religious censorship were dealt with in the writings. Socio-political and moral problems were exposed. And really, the act of writing was a form of freedom. The Latin American boom has always focused on Spanish-speaking writers. I'm including Jorge Amado from Brazil. I'm going to present the four authors of what they are called the core of the boom, which is, I have the book here, Julio Cortázar, Mario Vargas Llosa, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and Carlos Fuentes. There is this book written about the letters they exchange. And as I said, all the literary boom is about Spanish-speaking literature written in Spanish in Latin and South America, South, Central, and Mexico too, no? But Jorge Amado is there. He is from Brazil. He is from Bahia. He wrote in the, I'm going to mention these authors, and from each author, only one work because we don't have time for everything. So I'm going to include Brazil, and I'm going to include a woman because the boom has been a literature supposedly written by men, and women were not mentioned. So Doña Flor y sus dos maridos is a very famous work by Jorge Amado. It was very quickly set into film in New York, so it became very famous, and it was translated quickly also into French by Georgette Tavares Bastos, Dona Flor et ses deux maris. It's a humoristic comedy that situated in Bahia, which is the place where Jorge Amado was born. Jorge Amado uses local vocabulary and regional expressions, particularly from candomblé, which is an African syncretized religion in Brazil. And because he uses all this local vocabulary, translation is really a challenge, translation into other languages. Through the mystery, exoticism, and mysticism of Bahia, he narrates the hard reality of poor people using culturally marked terms. So I think he can be very well included in the boom because he is taking a local reality and giving it a universal projection. I like him very, very much. Mario Vargas Llosa was a friend of Jorge Amado. So Julio Cortázar, who's one of the four writers of the boom, as I said to you, I'm presenting them in a chronological order. He's from Argentina. one of his famous books was Rayuela, written in 1963, translated as Hopscotch by Gregory Rabassa in 1966. This translator is very worth mentioning him because he is going to be the translator of 100 Years of Solitude by Garcia Marquez. So what Cortázar does is he invites the reader to choose one or another way of reading his work from several possibilities. And at the beginning of the book, he gives the instructions. Chapters could be read chronologically, or the reader could insert chapters from the second part into the first part, as it is proposed by the author. And besides, he lists some chapters he considers not indispensable. So this is a little bit very original. He writes some chapters and he says to the reader, if you don't want, you don't need to read them. They are not necessary. He uses the interior monologue technique. So he's very much influenced by Joyce. He uses puns, slang, although like for George Amado, it means challenge for translation. So he introduces freely words and expressions in other languages because the book was written in Paris. He uses French words, but he also uses neologies. He creates a lot of words and puns. Yeah, he plays with the language and with the temporality of the narration. No, he goes present and past, and he, through the book, he states and discusses the great questions, the great, let's say, philosophical questions of the existence, and at the same time, he's laughing with us. He invites us to laugh. This is a writer that we like very much. Elena Garro in Mexico, so is the woman that I'm going to mention. He was the wife of, or the companion of Octavio Paz. She was a friend of Garcia Marquez. She was a friend of the people of the boom, but she was not, as I said before, included because there were no women included. One of the famous works is a novel, Recuerdos del Porvenir, written in 1963, Recollection of Things to Come, translated by Ruth L. Sims in 1969. So you see, she was quickly translated into English. From the title, you see what is the paradox of the title, Recollections of Things to Come. It is the narration of a disastrous historical moment of a Mexican town, Ixtepec. And the narration, the very, very original thing is that the narration is carried out in the first person by the town itself. Is the town who speaks. When you start reading the book, you don't realize what is happening, but who is talking? Who is the narrator? And then after some pages, you realize that it's the voice of the town. The town is a character in this novel. It's very beautiful. Myths and traditions of the pre-Hispanic world, mysticism, collective memoir, injustice, fear, are interwoven in a representation of the tragedy of the town, because the town is completely destroyed by military agents. And then, of course, we have Gabriel Garcia Marquez. He wrote many books. There are many books I like so much, like No One Writes to the Colonel, who's so much like, it's a kind of Waiting for Godot. No One Writes to the Colonel. But I'm going to mention then 100 Years of Solitude, because it was the novel after the writing of this novel, he won the Nobel Prize. And the translator is Gregory Rabassa. He translated the novel in 1970. The book narrates the story of 7 generations of the Buendia family in Macondo, a fictional town that shares characteristics of his native Aracataca in the Caribbean region of Colombia. He includes of all kinds of magical events that they take place there, and they are mingled with violence and death and a lot of stream of consciousness technique is used also there. At the end of the story, Amaranta Ursulo, because I have to tell you the end because it is very important from the point of view of translation. At the end of the story, Amaranta Ursula and Aureliano Babilonia are the only inhabitants of the deserted Macondo. Everybody has left Macondo. And Amaranta gives birth. Amaranta is the aunt of Aureliano Babilonia. So Amaranta gives birth to a child with a pig's tail, as it was prophesied. And that event signals the disappearance of the Buendia family. The child and Amaranta are going to die, and the only one who stays still alive is Aureliano Babilonia, whose story, the story of the Buendia family, at the moment of the destruction of the town, he is reading the manuscript in Sanskrit. So there we go to India. He's reading the manuscript in Sanskrit at the very moment when the hurricane is destroying Macondo. This is a very beautiful scene that I always discuss this scene with my students in the translation courses, because Aureliano Babilonia learned Sanskrit with the ghost of Melquiades, who's a gypsy who lived in Macondo. And at the moment of this very scene, he's reading the manuscript, who's written in Sanskrit, and he's reading out loud in Spanish. So it's a kind of, we call this technique the oral translation of it. It's an exercise we do in class, no, to do this translation, and he's doing it at that very moment. So it's a very beautiful scene. I could talk much more about Garcia Marquez, but then I'll go to Carlos Fuentes in Mexico. He also is a very, very great writer. One of the works that I'm going to mention is La Muerte de Artemio Cruz, published in 1962, and it translated in English by Sam Heilman. The Death of Artemio Cruz is a translation that has no difficulties, the title. So the interesting thing is the way this work is translated, is narrated. Artemio Cruz is agonizing, no? That's why is the death of Artemio Cruz. And before he dies, he lists in his mind the episodes that are important to him. But instead of just remembering them, he reverses, he re-elaborates every event, every single decision he has not been satisfied with throughout his life, and changes them one by one, building a future, building like a false life, a life he didn't live, building a future he's not going to have. So the technique to do this is the narration alternates in the first person and present tense at the beginning of each chapter, when we see how the reader sees how Artemio Cruz is dying, and then the narration in the second person and in the future tense, where Artemio Cruz is saying how he will change his life, because he doesn't write in conditional, but he writes in the future he will change his life. So it's a very short, it's not a long story, and it's very, very beautifully written. And then I'm going to end with Mario Vargas Llosa, who died recently from Peru. He also wrote a lot of novels. So I'm just going to mention La Ciudad y los Perros, which was the first novel he wrote in 1963. Literally, the translation is The City and the Dogs. And dogs are the name they give to first-year cadets in Peru, or in this military school where the story is set, perros, dogs. But in English, it was translated The Time of the Hero by Lysander Kemp in 1966. It narrates the experiences of a group of high school students in the final year in a military school. One of the students is killed, and all the story goes on trying to investigate who killed these students, we are led to believe in various settings of the killing. There's one of the guys named the Jaguar, and everything points to the evidence that he was the one who killed him out of vengeance. But at the end, this hypothesis proves wrong. It was really an accident. So we are there. But then the Jaguar makes a confession that he killed the students. And then we go on with the story and the confession, and then the confession proves to be false. So it is an open text with multiple interpretations. And there, Mario Vargas Llosa starts elaborating this technique of simultaneous dialogue that he develops very brilliantly in later novels. I can give some reference, but there's a lot of work written about the literary boom. Peter Bestseller, who wrote about this specifically moment, this decade, and this book that I just showed you, written by 4 authors, Carlos Aguirre, Gerald Martin, Javier Munguia, and Augusto Wong Campos, who recollected all the correspondence these authors had. It is great to read those letters. And Gerald Martin wrote a huge biography of Garcia Marquez. It took him 17 years to write this biography. And Regina Correa, who writes about the difficulty or the challenges of translating Jorge Amado's novels and Brazilian culture into English and into French. When I talk about the implications and the impact, not the implications, but the impact of the Latin American boom in literature, I can just say, because of Lipica is here, that, for example, he influenced Salman Rushdie, no? The Midnight's Children is said to be the novel of the magic realism of India. So this was, and Salman Rushdie has been various times in Colombia. He was an admirer of Garcia Marquez. He read all his stories. And so we can see how literature circulates and circulates thanks to translations. No, so that's my brief participation. So I think now we can go on to our conversation or to any questions. I have some questions for Joseph and Lipica. If you have questions for me, you can also ask me. And I'm going to ask if there are any questions in YouTube. Okay, so while Lector answers, Lipica, do you have any comments on Joseph's talk or on my brief presentation?
Yes, I have one general comment, or you may say closing remark. I learned a great deal from both the talks, and I think we should promote these kinds of events and discuss more on this idea of world literature. And to Mr. Joseph, if I may request him to talk about the bilingual dictionary, that would be great. Maybe briefly.
Yes, the dictionary of the 8th century that you mentioned, Joseph.
Yes, maybe, because I find it very interesting and I'm curious to know a little more about it. If we have time, like if time permits,
I'll put my microphone back. So your question is about today's bilingual dictionaries or the early dictionaries?
No, the bilingual dictionary. It's not a question, sir. I'm just curious to know more about it.
So
Joseph,
yes,
the thing is, you mentioned a great dictionary in the 8th century.
yes, yes. No, I mentioned I'll say two words. In the 8th century, one man called Al-Khalil ibn Ahmad al-Farahidi had an idea. And his idea was that if you take letters and you compose them, then you can get words. And so he discovered that words in Arabic would be with two consonants or two letters, say two-letter words, three-letter words, four-letter words, and a very small number of five-letter words, most of them being three-letter words. So he combined them, and combining letters allowed him to make a virtual dictionary, of course. And then once the virtual dictionary was combined, he imagined that we should ask to the learner, the scientist, the lexicographer, would ask what is there and what is not there. So he was a genius. And with this, he started with the virtual dictionary, which has much more, of course, words than there exist in reality. And then this allowed the possibility of making huge dictionary, 8th century to the 18th century, with 10 volumes, 20 volumes. It's extraordinary. And so that's the Arab tradition. Today, now to answer Lipika's question, the bilingual dictionaries, I'm working on a series of bilingual dictionaries, okay? So there are many bilingual dictionaries today. I'm working on a series which is called Mashatil. Mashatil means I don't know how to say it in, maybe Marta can help me, pépinière, when you have trees. So it's a relation to trees because of roots. Okay, so this series. The first volume is to appear now, and it's a learner's dictionary, and it gives information that you find nowhere else, such as systematically synonyms when there are synonyms, antonyms, systematically collocations, which no Arabic dictionary gives, systematically, of course, set expressions are given by many set expressions and set expressions, and the information given in the dictionary, and in addition to a translation which is very, very careful, because when you translate from one language to another, you get in the other language a word that has 4 or 5 meanings. So you have to be careful about the way you translate in bilingual dictionaries. And you have to give indications on which meaning you intend, and also a definition in Arabic of every word. So this is the thing I'm working on, but there are many other, of course, but the other bilingual dictionaries are traditional ones. That is, you have one word in Arabic, one word in French or English, or one word in English and the translation into Arabic. The best dictionary being Hans Wehr's Dictionary of the Arabic Language, translated originally in German, translated reference we have today.
Okay.
So that's it for.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you, Joseph. Pepinière is in Spanish is semillero, Joseph.
Oh yes, thank you. Thank you.
I wouldn't know if it has a similar word in English. Hotbed, I've seen, but
yes, I'm sure I can find it.
Okay.
That means that.
So that's very interesting. Lipika, I don't know if you want to comment on that, because there are some questions in the chat.
I got an answer. Thank
Okay.
you.
So,
It was a great presentation. Like both we had a great talks and presentation. Thank you so much.
thank you, Lipika.
Yes.
There is a question in the chat that is for the three of us. I would say,
Mm.
if we could elaborate on the concept of world.
On the notion of world literature.
Yes. And the second question is for you, Joseph. Where is going to be the list? You're going to send it to me, and maybe I can ask the technician to put the link to this list in the YouTube.
Yes, yes.
I think so.
Yes.
I think you can help me with that answer. Do you
Because if I start elaborating, it will take weeks. I can make if I just make a list with the, of course, the dates, the chronological list, I make it immediate. This I can make immediate.
You can send it to me afterwards, no problem.
Yes, yes. I will do that after we finish.
Okay.
And I have a question for Lipika, and then another one for Marta. The question for Lipika is related to the idea of world literature. Isn't it contradictory? That is, literature is something that people write with their own language, expressing their own experience, and it's clear that you express your experience much better in your home tongue, in your home language, okay, home tongue, in your mother tongue, than you would in another language. So between the fact that literature is obviously local and deeply rooted in one language and culture, and the idea of world literature. What would you say about this? This is, I'm rephrasing one of the questions we had, elaborating on what world literature is.
Yes, sir. Thank you for this question, because this is what I primarily work on. We get to know about world literature from great scholars and from the academics, right? But actually, in real, the idea of the world is always conceived locally, and that is the original idea of the world. And I think we need to look at the idea of world literature in a more democratic and neutral way, and call it either world literatures or literatures of the world instead of world literature as a nomenclature. And there is also, like, if I add to this question, like being translated into English, of course, yes, translation is important because that acts as a bridge. And without translation, possibly, each, like all local literatures would be islands in themselves. But translating it into English is not the solution. The solution is more translation into more languages, more vibrant culture of translation, and more education of world literature. And I think this is a point where I am trying to introduce a course, a brief introductory course on world literature in our center. So that is, I think, as Getty defined world literature as everybody should hasten to its approach. So by everybody, I think literally everyone, like the scholars, the writers, and those who are watching it simply with an interest in world literature, may join hands to promote this local idea of world literature and rephrase it as world literatures and not just world literature as a title. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lipika, and thank you, Joseph, for the question. Well, world literature goes back to Goethe, no? Belle literature, literature. But it has been given different meaning, no, that recycling meaning, which is what we're trying to do with this panel, no. This time, for example, this panel is in English, but we are planning a second one in French and a third one in Portuguese. Recently, we had a panel on multilingualism with ICALA, the language journal of one of the journals of the School of Languages. And we had English, French, Spanish, and two of the colleagues were from Romania. So it was, and there was even sign language in this presentation. So it was really multilingual. It is a challenge. It is the maybe it's comfortable to do it just in English, but I think we have to overcome that, because you said yourself, for example, Lipika, that you are doing world literature and you don't need English, no? Not all the time. Not all the
Yes,
time. Of course,
yes,
it's a great language. I love it, but why not in French? Why not
yes, of course.
translate it into our
And
native
you were
languages?
doing great. You're using presentation in sign language. We would love to watch it. I mean, this is how you strengthen this initiative and also contribute to this idea of multilingualism.
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay. So, and I can say that one of the ways to promote our languages is precisely to do bilingual or multilingual publications, no?
Yes,
Okay.
Of literary
Yes.
works. That's I would say. It is more expensive. It is, I suppose Joseph will tell us, when you are publishing it, it is more complicated to set a whole book, a book in three languages, no? And especially
Yes.
you
Yes.
have Arab language, for example, with the Spanish, or Chinese with, or
Mhm.
Sanskrit, or one of the Indian languages with the languages of our alphabet, no?
Yes. I have a question for Marta.
Okay.
Please. Marta, you talked about Latin America, okay? But in Latin America, first of all, you have Brazil with Portuguese, and you have Spanish. You talk about Latin American literature, or should one say Brazilian, Colombian, Peruvian, Argentinian literature? So, what's your point of view on that question?
I think, and it's not only me, I think we should talk about Latin America because we have a lot of points in common, no? And precisely during many years, and the boom, precisely the boom, let's say, isolated Brazil and the Portuguese language, and we make part of that, of this geography,
Okay.
and all the time, and that's something we're trying to motivate and to present in our discourses, is Latin America is Hispanic,
Mm-hmm.
and Lusophonic. No, we here in Latin America we speak Spanish, and we have
Yes, at the
Portuguese in
same.
Brazil, and we, as I say, for example, Jorge Amado, if you ever read, or there are films from his work, it is very much like places in the north of Colombia, like in Macondo. So we have lots of common points, although we have certain expressions that are different from different Spanish countries in Latin America, and we have the Portuguese, which is a great language. But we share the same, I would say that we share very much the same geography, the same social problems, very much the violence, and sometimes
That's essential. Yes.
yeah. Okay.
It would be the same with Arabic. You could say the same because
Animal.
you have dialects that vary from one region to another. But in fact, there is an Arab literature, an
Uh-huh.
Arabic literature in general.
Okay. So,
Thank you.
yeah, I think just I wanted to see what I was going. See, so in the conclusions I wrote here, I said that after what Lipika presented, you would say that even though that project of integrating global and local literature, that was the publication of Nobel Prizes, you said it was not a success. And
yes,
but the interesting thing is that all those Nobel Prizes were read in Odia language. And my question is, was any Latin American writer published there at that time?
No,
No.
no, but I'll try to find out. But I think as it is a very old publishing house, we don't have much information on it. Information either we find from personal collections or from libraries, and every time you find just one print. So I don't have a full catalog of what are the books published. But I think no Latin American writer was published. But I'll find out if there is any reference or any at least forms a part of a book. I'll find out and let you know. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Lipika. Joseph, I don't know if you have any more comments.
Altogether, yes. In one real question could be the same with Lipika, Marta. I could also ask myself, I'll ask the two of you the question. Are there new authors that are coming up today, emerging authors? So because the authors you mentioned right in the 1960s, most of them, they're great masterpieces. Everything is a masterpiece. And some of them I have not read, and I'm going to run to the library and buy them.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to present the boom because of this introductory panel, I would say. This is an introductory panel to world literature as multicultural, multilinguistic phenomena. But of course, we have many writers. I would like to present you some local writers like Tomás Carrasquilla, an author from here, from this region, whose translation is really, really a challenge. So we have many. They are not minor authors in our country, but they have been less translated, no? And of course, the boom was a very special moment in Latin America, although I see that today, most of the writers, the contemporary writers, are being translated, no?
Yes.
So they are very well known. And we have Juan Gabriel Vázquez, for example, is one very known writer now. Who is, I think I told you, Joseph, that he's a friend of Isham Matar, this Lebanese writer.
Yes.
So now also much more than before, we don't need to be in Paris to be related to the world, you see? So many of our writers have this multicultural thought also. Lipika wants to say something to the question.
Yes.
Joseph's question.
Yes, I mean, all the translations that we see in Odia in Odia world literature that I mentioned, all famous writers. Like in the first initiative, all authors of Nobel Prize winning books, and in the second one also, all famous, as I mentioned. And one interesting thing one can find, as you mentioned, Salman Rushdie. I think that's a point where you can start. We do not find writers like Salman Rushdie or V.S. Naipaul, they're being translated or included in the series, where you find everybody else, but not these writers, maybe because they are considered writers of diasporic origin. So we need to find out why. They're famous and people know them. Salman Rushdie is a familiar name like Shakespeare or T.S. Eliot. So why not Rushdie? So writers with diasporic origin, they're not included in the series. Maybe the translators or the publishers, they perceived it as maybe less than the world stature. That may be the reason. But that is one interesting point I'd like. So I think it calls for more investigation.
Okay. So before thanking you and saying until next time, I just want to mention a statement of Amadou Hampâté Bâ, the author that Yeo could not present, because he said that strengthening and promoting the local, we could we could participate in world literature, strengthening and promoting the local. So this is something very important that we are trying to do also with native languages, which is something which we find it is taking a lot of force in our university too. Excuse me, Mariana wrote something. I think that nowadays the main thing that world literature shares is the resistance to imperialism. Great comment. The opportunity of multiculturalism is the resistance that's only possible from the difference. Great, Mariana. Thank you very much. Yes. So yes, that's
a great comment. In fact,
yeah,
that's what we're trying to do through these events, through setting up a center, through discussions like this.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, Mariana, for your comment. So I'll see you next time, Joseph and Lipika. I'm very grateful, and our School of Language is also very grateful with you. I'm grateful to all the listeners or the viewers who were online.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Joseph.
Thank you.
And so see you.
I'll see you.
Yeah.
See you next.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Have a nice rest. For me, the day begins. Okay.
Yes,
ciao.
and I'll type my list immediately and send it to you by mail.
Thank you. Thank you to Hector for his help with the technique.
Okay. Before the engine gets cold, I'll type the list immediately.
Okay. Thank you very much.